Let's talk about the Alexanders. Okay, I'm only gonna do Alexander 2 and 3. I don't know who Alexander 1 is, but Alexander 2 and 3, they are father and son. They are known as the Tsar Liberator and the Tsar Repressor. The Tsar Liberator is Alexander II. There's gonna be a question 100% that's like, oh, compare Alexander 1, Alexander 2, Alexander 2, Alexander 3. And you know what we can do? Compare them. Or something about how like one of them's a liberator, one's a repressor. To what extent are they that? Let's just do the facts and then we can do the analyzing later. So Alexander II abolished serfdom to avoid a revolution from below. This is to maintain his autocratic power. Serfdom impeded the potential economic development of Russia. Even though he did this whole thing about releasing the serfs, socially it was still repressive because the serfs were tied to their land, so they had like 19 years to repay the land that they bought off. Speaking about economic policies, railways went from 6,000 to 14,000 miles. This is Rutern's economic policy. This increased the movement of products such as grain and increased economic pace. There was also financial reforms. There was a united treasury with centralized like department accounts, and there was the Puslik budget. I don't know what that is. What were the effects? The government was still in debt. 1/3 of the yearly expenses were literally debt. No stabilization of the Russian currency. Government tried to stimulate economic boom, which did not work. And overall, none of his policies were that successful. All of the things that he introduced was all to maintain his autocratic control. Then Alexander, I don't know this topic. Alexander III, though, this is the thing about economic policies at the time. 1855 and 1881 had similar economic profiles. It was really agrarian and small middle class. There was so many peasants. He introduced, his financial ministers introduced the Meladenev Tariff Act in 1891, which was the highest tariff act that Russia's ever seen, which increased grain import, and Russia was able to repay their loan to France because of it. This was under Vishnegradsky, by the way, the finance minister. 1892, which was Sergei Witte, I think, grain exports increased by 19%, and the budget was actually in surplus. In 1891, railways were at 31,000 miles, which had doubled since Alexander II. So you could say that this was a massively success. Also, the ruble was put on gold standard, so the currency was able to be stabilized. What were the effects of these economic policies? Alexander III, foreign investments increased 98 million to 111 million. You could say this is a win, but then this means that they're also depending on foreign investment. They were the fourth largest economy in the world. Grain exports increased. It was 2% in 1850 and 18% in 1899. There was a famine in 1891 as well, where 17 out of 39 provinces in Russia were affected, and there was more than 500,000 dead. Again, raised capital, but really they just relied on foreign investments, which you could call a win. Like, a win is a win, but you just have to think about it. In the future, they go through a lot of issues, and relying on foreign investments is not very good. Foreign investments were from France and Belgium, by the way. Comparison of them. Ideologically wise, they had the same idea of economic development whilst keeping their autocratic status. So they would do anything economically, but all to keep their economic status. However, Alexander III did have better results than Alexander II. So overall, they did have the same ideas, but third was better and more significant. This is their economic policy. Okay, now let's just do a question example. The reigns of Alexander II and III had more similarities than differences. To what extent do you agree with this statement? I mean, once you have this question, you can basically answer all the other ones. Let me just read you other questions. Reigns of Alexander II and Alexander III were marked by political continuity but significant economic change. Despite liberal policies, Alexander II was just as conservative as Alexander III. To what extent do you agree with this statement? This is all about comparing the similarities and differences. Let's just analyze. The reigns of Alexander II and Alexander III had more similarities and differences. To what extent do you agree with this statement? So we're just going to go in paragraph 1. I'm going to talk about similarity, ideologically wise. I want to say both of them were just as repressive as each other at the end of the day in the social area. Because even though Alexander II wanted to give, supposedly, out of his, liberal heart, wanted to give the serfs more freedom, he just did it to keep autocratic power. So they wanted to keep their autocratic status, but they just had different methods in doing so. Alexander II emancipated the serfs to avoid a revolution from below. He introduced the Duma, the Zemstva, which is more liberal. It enabled him to extend his control of the state. So we could see it as liberal, but also it did also enable him to be more controlling. Alexander III, number one, protect autocracy. He was obsessed with that. So he introduced land captains and censorship was reinforced, and he got rid of the Duma. They both had different approaches. Basically, Alexander II was like, I need to be a bit liberal so people will like me. And Alexander III was like, I don't care if people like me. They're going to have to like me anyways because they're not allowed to oppose me. On top of that, with Alexander II's conservative reaction shows that at heart, he was just as autocratic as Alexander III was. Censorship and social policies. Alexander II was more liberal in education. He eased censorship, education changed, and opposition increased. He allowed that to happen because he wanted a more liberal education system, even though he literally had a secret police. What I mean by the secret police thing is that even though he had like education that would open up the minds of the people, he still had a secret police to repress any sort of opposition or check up on any opposition that was happening. So it was kind of not that liberal anyways. Out of all the serfs, 15% of them were tied to land and 85% of them became landlords. So that's a success in terms of liberating them. Alexander III was completely against the abolition of serfdom and political change, and he had really traditional values, which he ended up, repressing everything right afterwards by introducing the land captains and by deleting the Duma, Then differences, we can talk about economic development. This is when we bring in what I just said about how Alexander II and Alexander III, they had the same aims and the ideas to modernize the economy. It's just that Alexander II was not as developed as Alexander III. Alexander III had like Witte and Vyshnegradsky, so he stabilized the ruble. Russia was the fourth largest, etc., etc., etc. Exports increased. That's it. And you have a whole essay, and you can literally do this. Despite his liberal policies, Alexander II was just as conservative as Alexander III. Number one, yes, ideology-wise. Two, not really. Censorship and social. Number three, economic development. Okay, but just to overall conclude what I was trying to say there, they had the same aims. They wanted to maintain autocracy and they wanted to better the economic state of Russia. Just that they had different methods in doing so. Alexander II made the mistake of liberating because he thought that's how he would get support, and that's how he thought that he would reduce opposition, right, by creating a more liberal system. But all it did was increase opposition, and he nearly died, and so he repressed it. Then Alexander III, seeing that, was like, absolutely no way am I gonna liberate shit if that's what's gonna happen to me. They had the same aims, different methods across political and economic. Social was a bit different, but social is tied to political. I just aced it. If this question doesn't come up, I'm gonna be so mad.